Welcome to Rune Soup, a podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal, coming to you from sunny West London. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. Enjoy. Than Judika Illes. Judika is a folklorist, professional witch, educator, and author of numerous books, including the impossibly comprehensive Element Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells, which I have lugged across multiple countries now. Judika, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Gordon.
So
I'm very happy to be with you.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. I wasn't kidding about lugging the book around. I think it's three countries now. It's always when I go back to. It's quite relaxing to sort of flip through and get ideas. It's the ultimate cookbook.
Well, that is the structure that the book is based on. When I was persuaded to write it, I was told that the model I was given by my publisher was they were seeking a joy of cooking, of witchcraft. And so I own a copy of The Joy of Cooking, and I sat there and I deconstructed that book, trying to figure out the structure of how it was written, and I used that as the template to write Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells. And the interesting thing is most people don't see that, but I was very blessed to have spoken with, before she died, Elizabeth Pepper, who was the founder and the publisher of the Witch's Almanac. And before she had founded the Witch's Almanac, she had worked for Gourmet magazine, and she recognized it immediately. It was very interesting.
Oh, cool. So,
yeah.
So 5,000 isn't a small number. Are you sort of a hoarder or something? I mean, how does one accumulate 5,000 spells?
I am. Well, that is a good question. I am. There's that fine line between hoarding and collecting. I am, a sun sign Cancer, a moon child, and we do have a reputation as hoarders. I have been interested in spells and witchcraft and the magical arts and divination all of my life. But that was just for me. I did not expect to become an author of esoterica and metaphysics. What I had, I have a gigantic, and getting more gigantic every day, manuscript devoted to fertility and infertility that I began, 25 years ago. And originally for myself, I was collecting information. And, I was just so sure someone else had written this book. And, that's how you know to write a book, listeners. If you are seeking a book that you are so sure has been written, and it hasn't, that's the clue that maybe you should be writing it. Again, researching this, and the info hooked me in. So even after I'm my own testimonial, I have 2 children, but after even then, I kept collecting file cards full of interesting factoids and things, and I was very focused initially, and if it wasn't specifically about fertility, I ignored it. But then that started itching at me, because in my researching, and I'm an obsessive compulsive researcher, I do it all the time. And I do it in odd places. People say, where are your sources? I read travel books and cookbooks, and I find one line in an entire book, and and it was worth it for me. In the process of researching this, I was finding all this just great spells that I didn't need, but they were so interesting. And I was afraid that if I didn't write it down, I would never find it again. So I began keeping extra shoeboxes full of file cards devoted to other topics that, they were just interesting.
So, you keep going.
Well, eventually, how I became a metaphysical writer, eventually I decided to publish my fertility book, which for marketing reasons no one has ever really wanted to publish. And, I keep trying, and maybe one day I will publish it myself. But a publisher asked me, there was a chapter of magic spells in that book. Would I turn that into my first what became my first book. And I, said, sure. And I did, and that set me on a different path. And then but the publisher knew I had these files. And so in the process of still attempting to sell my fertility book, he talked me into 5,000 spells. So, people say, how long did you write the book? The book itself was written in about 9 months, but I had been collecting the material for years and years and years.
Well, see, that's really interesting. We were just talking before the show about being weirdly early for travel or what have you as a kind of OCD tick. I'm a similar. Well, I'm Sun Sign Cancer as well, and so underneath. Speaking of hoarding, underneath the desk where I'm recording this, because I've run out of actual bookshelf, is just stacks of books, and there's a little space that I can get my chair in.
Oh, me too. Yeah. They're everywhere.
And today, I just want to go back to the hoarding of information, because I thought, I've got a podcast this evening. I spent pretty much the whole day in the British Library researching, and you can tell it gets to hoarding levels because I'm in the sort of photocopying area, photocopying away, and it's quite expensive. But waves of other people are using the machines around me, and they come and go, and I'm still there in silence. And I'm like, no, I have to go home now. And also, I haven't really spoken to anyone today because I've been in a library. So I'm like, do I need to do vocal scales? What do I do? But yeah.
Well, that's how I write, and people don't believe me because when I'm not full on writing mode, I'm sociable, and I warn people. When I start writing, I will not answer my email. I will not, be on social media. I will, I will not, I'll be delayed. And they kind of nod their heads at me, but then they get angry at me when I actually do.
I don't think it's real. And also, well, the one I add to that is, and if you come by my house to see me, I will look so unpresentable, you'll just run screaming from the front door. And that's how you know you're in it.
Yeah. 5,000 Spells was written. We didn't know what we were getting involved in. 5,000 Spells is my third published book. The second book was a little book. It's my little book of spells with 150 spells. When we started, the publisher came up with the number. They wanted 5,000 spells. We were discussing, because the previous book had 150. So we were talking, and at one point we were up to 10,000. And these are all, there are as many spells as there are grains of sand on a beach. There is an indefinite number. There are always new spells and new variations. So you could come up with, if I wanted to put myself through that again, I could write another the next 5,000. The next
5,000, yeah. Yeah.
But I wrote that. We totally miscalculated. It was supposed to be, I have a contract that says 450 pages. And, have it done by May. And I said, okay. And, 100 pages in, I'm still writing the introduction. Clearly, none of us had done the math. How many spells can you squeeze on a page?
Well, see, for me, that's where
my favorite...
Yeah, you go. Carry on.
No, you go.
This is what I like about it, because it does. This is the joy of cooking the cookbook thing, because as you say, there are so many of them. You get to 5,000, and it might there's a cutoff point probably around the 4,000 mark, at which point it becomes a book of infinity spells, because what you do is flip through it for that cookbook style inspiration, and for me. The other part of it is it's almost like a 777 that I can get my heads around, because that is a structure of ingredients and kind of correspondences that it fits into one particular system at one particular point in time. But there are Hawaiian spells, there are Eastern European spells, and so you get that kind of global inspiration, and you can see the pattern because there's so many of them. Even though the ingredients are localized to whatever biosphere they come from, you see the pattern of different, or the structure behind it. And for me, that's why I carry it around country to country, because I'm like, this is, and I know Jason Miller says it all the time. If you, if students ask him for spells, he's like, if you want spells, get Judika's book, and then you don't need any more spells.
Oh, that's nice of Jason. Well, no one needs 5. That book is partly practical. That book has a lot of goals behind it. So, some of it is practical. Some of it is to encourage people to find their wings as spellcasters. And,
maybe to create your own spells, to be inspired to create your own or to tweak them. And some of the material in there is I wrote it so that it would be preserved and so that it would be written about respectfully, because a tremendous quantity of books about spells are written disparagingly. And I love that whole spell casting culture. And there is a culture to it. And if you do, and I mean, I wrote that book, I was doing nothing but thinking about spells for months and months and months. I went from collecting gradually over years to this really, really concentrated focus. And what you will discover, as you were saying, and I was so glad to hear you spell casting. And once you cast, you can do anything. You can create your own so easily once you've tuned into that current. But some of them are clearly not practical anymore. But I don't know that some of them ever were. And some of them are, they're documents. They're documents of what people have done in different places and different eras and different circumstances. And I found that very interesting.
So, okay, that kind of interest in sort of antiquarianism and folklore, obviously, one may not necessarily have preceded the witchcraft piece, because typically we start with, and I'm about to ask you, Judika, if you were a weird kid, but
yeah.
So was it something that was kind of this way of seeing the world and this way of kind of perceiving value in those folkloric pieces and all that kind of stuff? Were you a weird kid?
I was a weird kid. And maybe I would have been a weird kid anyway. I was a weird kid. I also come from a refugee family. They're Hungarian refugees who came to the U.S. I was born here, although I'm the first person. My older sister was born in Hungary. We were really out of place. So I have my own natural weirdness. My folklore, actually, my interest in folklore, that I come by that was not perceived as weird in my family. My mother had a tremendous interest in folklore, and she grew up in a village in what is now Slovakia, and knew these things from her childhood from different people. So these were things my mother taught herself English by teaching me to read, and I learned to read when I was 3. And, when we read together, and, what did we read? We read fairy tales and, folklore. So, I mean, that is, that's like mother's milk to me, essentially. But my weirdness, and I do have, I have Aquarius rising. I was just always out of step. I write about this. Oh, I know. I think where I write about it. I wrote the introduction. I write introductions to other people's books. I do a lot of writing, and sometimes I forget what I wrote is actually located, like which book. But I think it's the introduction to Marion Green's. Wiser Books put out a compilation. Marion Green, her Aquarian Magic series. It's now collected in one volume. It was 2 books that have been put into one volume, and I wrote the introduction. And, I went to school, and, the other children dubbed me the mystic one. I always was interested in all sorts of esoterica, astrology, and I had a deck of tarot cards when I was a child. And in my family, I don't think I was... in my family, I am odd because I am out of sequence. My closest siblings are 12 years older, and their children are 18 years younger. And so I was kind of a unique being, and in the best possible way, I was kind of treated like a puppy. My parents brought me everywhere. I was always with adults, as long as they left me alone to do whatever I wanted to do, as long as I wasn't embarrassing. So I could read, if there had been, if someone had, a Harold Robbins novel on the table, my parents would never, I could have been 7, they would have never told me not to read it. There was no censorship as long as I was well behaved, and I had access to all kinds of things because of that. And I heard a lot of, adult conversations. But in school, I went to school not really speaking English well. I'm completely, I'm completely self-taught. So I had interests that were out of step with other people. My parents were a little older than the other kids' parents. Totally, totally weird. Totally. It's really only in my adulthood that that I have found kindred spirits and a peer group.
Yeah, that's very interesting and almost it's almost a fairy tale story given where you ended up if you were if you're an out of sequence kid like that, because it also meant, as you say, your siblings are older, so you're effectively going to school as an only child. It's not like you have a brother or a sister around you, so the language
sister
barrier and all that as
my
well.
sister and I never went to the same school ever.
Wow.
I mean, none of us was ever. My mother always said she had two only children, and that's that's true.
Oh, fascinating. So you said you had tarot cards as a kid. I mean, did you?
Well, they were my sisters.
I was going to ask, where'd you get them from? Did you save up allowance or?
My 1966, we were living in New York City, and we were living in Queens, and my sister had started. I was starting first grade, and my sister was starting college, and she went to university at Cooper Union, which is an art school, an art and engineering school, but she went to the art school in what is the East Village in New York, in Manhattan. And at that time, the old Samuel Weiser bookstore was in the neighborhood. And the Samuel Weiser bookstore is one of the oldest bookstores devoted purely to esoteric books in the United States. And she would shop there. And she would bring home things. She brought home astrology books and numerology books and Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, all kinds of stuff. And I could read. And I was left alone with them. And one day she came home with the Builders of the Addendum tarot cards. And I just, it was love at first sight. I just looked at those and it was, people always say, why? I don't know. Why do some people sing? Why do some people dance? Why do some people, love to surf? I looked at those cards and I love tarot cards. If I could, I would do nothing but readings. If my life could have gone in different directions, maybe, I love divination and I just fell in love with those cards. And of course, I was 6 and I was home a lot. And my sister, was in college and had a boyfriend and was not home and, and I think did not love them the way I did. She was interested in them, but I love them. So I took them. I still have them. I took her records too.
You were that sibling.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I was, like a little, I was 6.
Yeah. So does that mean you were, for a child, were you reasonably good at the tarot cards by the time you got to school age, and would you read for your friends and that kind of thing?
No, I did not read. Eventually, by the time I was a very shy child. I mean, sometimes I look at, if you stand outside and look at yourself, it's incredible to me. I was terrified of speaking out loud. Every time I opened my mouth. Once we moved from New York to New Jersey, in New York City, I was with a lot of other children who didn't speak English properly. But by the time I moved to New Jersey, in a much less diverse area with children of, let's just say, limited backgrounds, although I didn't see that at the time. What I saw was that they said everything right and I didn't. I was terrified of speaking aloud, terrified of opening my mouth. Every time I opened my mouth, I said something, somebody else laughed because I said it wrong. I said it filtered through, I say my first language is Hungarian. My second language is Spanglish because that's how I learned Spanish. I learned English through, that combination Spanish-English that is, you'll see in the New York City outer boroughs. And then I learned English, and it took me years to really, really speak well. And I was an English major in college. It was something that was my obsession, my primary focus. So no, I didn't read for other people. That was my thing. I think in some ways I was very blessed because I received the cards without a real book, and no one taught me, and I was just left alone. I mean, I understood what they were for. I had a concept of divination and fortune telling and and meditation and all sorts of I comprehended what they were, but I was sort of left alone to play with them and develop my own relationships with the cards. And I've always thought that was very fortunate because I don't have negative associations of cards that a lot of other people do. I'm thinking specifically of the swords, which I understand those cards. I read for I read for myself. By the time I was in middle school, sort of as an adolescent, I read for some close friends, but I did not begin reading professionally until I was in my late 20s. I had a corporate job. I had been a travel consultant. I had lost that job, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And I thought, well, I can read cards. And then I had this moment of panic where I thought, oh my God, what if I can't read cards? What if I've been doing it wrong? And I took a class in one of the New York adult educations. I don't know if it's the Learning Annex, Open Center, something like that. I took a class and discovered, in fact, I had not been doing it wrong. So I that was very reassuring. And at that point, so that's 1988, where I actually started reading professionally.
And had you sort of discovered witchcraft or encountered it before that? I mean, was there a progression? You steal your sister's deck of cards by the age of 12. Your habit means you've got to have 3 sets of cards. And I mean, is there an intervening sort of paranormal journey in between?
It's all a jumble. It's all a jumble. But when people say witchcraft, they mean different things.
Sure.
I knew witchcraft in terms of folk witchcraft, folk magic forever, because it's something that my mother was aware of that. I knew of folk witches within, not just in fairy tales, but also living people. I had a concept of that. I did not have a concept. When a lot of people say witchcraft, they assume it's going to be some sort, especially a Western form of initiated witchcraft, as in some sort of Wicca. I did not encounter that until I was almost published in my 30s.
Yeah, that's definitely not what I meant by it.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's not deliberate. That was for whatever reason, it didn't cross my path. That was not my encounter. So I did have a background in witchcraft. I was conscious of that. Then when coincidentally, when I took that class in tarot to make sure I was doing it correctly, I became close friends with the instructor. And, we had an informal coven, but I even before that, there was, the internet is a wonderful thing, and it allows us to have contact with each other, but also I think some subtle local traditions are lost. There was this tradition of New York City styled witchcraft that was very there were formal aspects of it. If you went to enchantments, and I've been editing, proofreading a new edition of The Enchanted Candle for Lady Rhea, who is, in some ways the current queen of the witches of New York, the traditional New York City style witches, and that is certainly in an initiated, she worked at the Warlock shop with Herman Slater, and so there is an initiated current, but then there were also there was sort of this outer temple. A lot of people who were just this combination of American sort of Western Wicca-ish, clearly somebody had read a book blended with Espiritismo, which is, the Puerto Rican school of spiritualism. at that time, that Caribbean Latin American influence was very, very strong in New York City, and it had there's sort of a local flavor to it. And I definitely come up from that. That was definitely an influence for me. But it was just something you learned being there and from other people there. It wasn't, I don't think, particularly self-conscious.
Yeah, well, when you have moments like that, they do tend to emerge organically amongst a group.
Exactly.
And it doesn't really, you can't point to a text. It's just people
No.
vibing on whatever's going on.
Yeah, a lot of, Espiritismo, a lot of, there were a lot of Cubans. And so Santeria, but not as an initiated form, but as an aleo, as an uninitiated. So uninitiated people teaching other uninitiated people. And I now have the knowledge. I can feel like, I can feel some people out there cringing already. But that is, there is just this flexibility and a freedom that I think is very, very much at the heart of witchcraft, that anti-authoritarianism. No one's
absolutely. You don't need a stamp of approval on it,
right?
As long as you're not hanging a shingle out and declaring yourself some sort of Santeria high priestess. Then
no, and nobody was
exactly.
Right. Well, I'm sure somebody was, but those were not the people I was encountering, and it was very organic. It wasn't, I went looking for this or went looking for that. At that time, it was harder to look. It was more what crossed your path. It's now you go on Amazon or the internet and you order whatever you want. When I was researching my Encyclopedia of Spirits, I ordered books from Lithuania and from Korea. I mean, you couldn't do that back then. Or, I mean, one of my books without the internet, and being able to type on a computer keyboard as opposed to a typewriter, one of my books would have been a lifetime's work. For those who are not familiar, they're big. Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells is 1,000 pages. The others are all, 800 plus. Mystic Saints and Sages, they managed to package it so it looks smaller, but I saw the manuscript. It wasn't significantly smaller. I wrote the manuscript. My books, the dilemma with my books for a publisher is they are expensive to ship. And who's going to pay for the shipping? When 5,000 Spells, the original edition, the original hardcover edition came out, Amazon.com would not do they did free shipping for like a month, and then they changed their mind.
Really?
So, oh yeah. Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells was not available in the U.S. for about 3 years. And the more they play with them, they're able to make the books a little lighter and more shipping friendly, and this a little more cost effective. But that's why if you look at 5,000 Spells, there are so many different covers. The originals are these. I mean, the originals were over £5. I calculate like an American. We don't do metric, so £5 in weight. It was over £5. It was quite expensive to ship.
Interesting.
Encyclopedia of Witchcraft was just slightly less.
Oh, well, in the next few years, Amazon will be delivering by robot. So, as long as as long as the drones can actually pick them up, as long as you don't order them both at once, the drones will be fine. So, I mean, after you did the course and you said, okay, I'm out of the travel biz, I've done the course. What was your first professional reading like? Can you still remember it?
I don't remember.
You don't oh my God, I'm really scared. It wasn't any of that kind of stuff. You're just like, okay, let's do this.
No, because I had gone to other people. So I had gone for professional readers. I had gone to other people. So, I had been on the other side of the table. So I knew what was, I had had good readings. I had had not so good readings. So I knew what was expected of me. So I wasn't nervous like that. There is a nervousness before every reading. I worked, my boot camp was, a couple of years after that, I went to work for a psychic hotline where I was on the overnights, and I was, at the time when, it was hot, and, the calls were just coming in one after the other. All night, I would read from 10 o'clock at night until until I was done, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. And, that constant, you'd hang up the phone and another call will be right there. So, the fear is that you will say, the cards are always right, but the reader might be wrong. So the fear is that you will say something that will have a negative effect on someone's life rather than a positive one, that you will misinterpret a circumstance. Not so much. I have people who I've read for over 20 years now, maybe more, and that's a very intimate relationship. And those, there's a confidence. You know their lives, and you know their desires, and you know their circumstances. But strangers come to see you, and some people are, they're cautious. They're afraid. You might be a charlatan, so they'll sort of build this wall around themselves so you can prove yourselves to them. But then you're kind of feeling. I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between a reader and a psychic. A psychic who gets, a hit. I know someone wants to kill you. And this is what they look like. Because they can see it, as opposed to someone who's reading the cards and trying to create a narrative that will be beneficial to the person, and is not necessarily getting those kinds of hits with clarity.
Yeah.
So, there's always that fear. I have rituals I do, and I pray, and you want to be able to be. I see the cards as allies and as tools to improve our lives, not to preach, doom and I don't think you're stuck. I think that's the whole thing with magic spells also. Life is hard and things go wrong, and we often find ourselves in bad circumstances. And all these things, whether they are different modes of divination or the magical energy that can be converted into a magic spell, these are there to help us live better lives and to be happier and to escape from dire circumstances. So it's not, you will meet somebody terrible and terrible things will happen to you. I hate those kind of readings.
For sure.
You're doomed.
Yeah.
Give it up. You're doomed.
So, is there a particular deck that you kind of return to in a professional setting, or are there decks you have known, so to speak, over the tarot career?
Yeah, my chief professional deck, especially if I'm reading on the phone or in a shop where time is of the essence. I use the Centennial Edition Rider-Waite-Smith. I find the colors of that very soothing. That Rider-Waite-Smith, I know people get bored with it because it's so ever-present, omnipresent, but it is so reliable. You can always get a reading from it. So if somebody has an emergency and they call me up, oh my God, I have, whatever, can you read for me now? I have one at hand, always. And, you can take it out and you can do a reading. When I read in stores, sometimes I have a Halloween tarot. Kipling West is the artist. And I like that one because especially if I'm reading for people who are not familiar with cards and the only experience they have of tarot cards is they've seen a death card on, a crime show on television. It's a little softer. It's a fun deck. It works. It's based on a Rider-Waite-Smith system, and it works. But, there's less gasping when the hangman comes up or death comes up. So that's kind of reassuring. I have different decks that I sometimes bring with me. Sometimes when I read in a shop, I'll have different decks, and I let people pick the one they like.
Okay.
Which is always, it's interesting for me to see which ones they pick. And then I have decks that I like and that I collect, but some of those are just for me.
Yeah.
Some of those are. Some of them are just they're pieces of art rather than working tarot decks, and some of them are just not. I can't. I personally, maybe somebody else can. I personally can't always get a reading out of them. And when you read for other people as a professional, you have to be able to. It's like if you go to a pharmacy to get your prescription filled, the pharmacist can't tell you, oh, I'm not feeling it right now. come back
Yeah.
later. So, I mean, it's similar. You're a professional and you have to, you have to be able to do it.
A couple of interesting insights there. I really like the idea of having a softer deck because, I mean, you just said the Rider Waite is ubiquitous, and it is for us, but the kind of the shapes and the colors and the almost line drawing thing of it might look too creepy. As you say, people would have seen it on a crime show or in a Hammer horror film or something,
Right.
and you go, oh, maybe that's not the right one. Interesting. I hadn't really. I mean, I did a bit of it at university, just for sort of friends of friends, mostly for alcohol money, and yeah, that. I never thought when that would happen, and even now, if I'm reading for someone, I'll take multiple decks because some of them have a different emotional range. So if the questions, or if the reader is going in a direction like I need some help because my relationship isn't good and neither is my housing situation and so on, I can kind of emotionally match. And there are ones for people who are going on new life journeys. The Grail Tarot, the Arthurian Tarot, anything where people are like, I'm just a bit lost, what do I do? And you can kind
quest.
and you sort of can emotionally match the story contained within the cards to, or as best as possible. But it's interesting to say get them to pick because that's probably faster than me trying to eke out what kind of emotional range their questions are going to be in. I'm just going to do that next time.
It's also very revealing. It's very quite revealing which decks people choose. Some of them are more romantic looking than others, or more beautiful than others, and some of them are, some people like that traditional, a tarot deck that looks like a tarot deck.
Yeah, that just means I have to, like yourself. I mean, let me back that up. So, how many approximately tarot decks does the woman with 5,000 spells have?
Oh, not nearly that many. I don't know. I haven't, that's interesting. I haven't counted. Probably. I'm not a super collector. I spend my money in books instead. And tarot cards have become expensive. When I was in my youth, they were not. I remember being a teenager and I would visit my sister who was married and living in Massachusetts, and she would take me to, a shop called the Alchemist Shop that was sort of a combination health food / esoteric shop. And I would buy a deck. It was my summer tradition. I would come home with a deck. But I was a kid with no money, and maybe it cost me $10. And now, it's very difficult. Everything is packaged in a box with a book, and it's quite pricey. So I think it's changed the nature of collecting. I guess I maybe over the years, I don't know, probably no more than 50.
Yeah, cool.
Probably less.
Well, that would probably tip you into hoarder category if you're like, I have 800. Thank you for asking, Gordon. I don't think you need 800.
There are people who do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There are people who do. And I also have, I can read with playing cards. I'm working on that Lenormand. That's a little difficult for me.
So interesting.
But I'm working on it.
I know exactly what you mean. I can do the Sibylla cards really well. I love them if I'm going for a non-tarot.
Yeah.
But I can't get Lenormand to fly for me. And I want to. It's annoying me because I'm like, come on.
Yeah. Exactly. It can't fly. I play with runes over the years, and I would like them to fly for me like tarot cards. That is, I would like to be able to be as good with runes as I am with tarot cards. And I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. I didn't buy very much when I was at Pantheacon. We were discussing Pantheacon before we began the show, but I did come home with a set of very nice runes. That was my purchase of the event. I read tea leaves also. And that's something that I have done in shops and that I can do. I can fly with those tea leaves. The problem with tea leaves is it is by nature a leisurely form of divination. You should be sitting around with the tea. Shops don't often like it because it takes a long time. Mm. And there aren't as many tea shops as there should be in the U.S.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
we
I
have loads
love
of them, but I think you'd get some looks.
yeah. Well, some tea shops will have a reader on, if you would like your leaves read, they have someone there, and that's actually a very nice way of doing it because the drinking of the tea is the equivalent of the shuffling of the cards. So you can't, you actually, the person getting the reading should drink the tea. And there's, all kinds of shortcuts get them to drink 3 sips, but it's not the kind of divination that is at its best when it's fast and rushed. As opposed to, in an emergency, you can do a 3-card spread and, or even a 1-card draw. And you can get a very, very valid reading from that.
Yeah, you're right. The tea leaf thing belongs with sort of that 17th century divining your husband's initials by throwing,
Yes.
nuts into the
Yep.
fire when
Yeah,
you're sitting
yeah,
around,
yeah.
that kind of thing. It's, these things work, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have that same kind of gypsy wagon at the end of town fortune teller pace that you get with cards.
Yes, 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 yes. Those things where you have to peel the apple and, all in one peel and then, throw that peel over your shoulder and see what kind of a letter it creates. They're so much fun, but it's a different pace. It was for a time when people, there was no television, there was no computer, there were no games. People had a different rhythm to their lives.
And different ritual spaces. So I'm thinking
Yeah.
of, I think it's in one of the Cyprian grimoires, but there is a sort of throwing of, it might even be hazelnuts. It might be like a Christmas Eve thing for a marriage divination. But you have to picture that it's the Iberian Peninsula and it's cold and your family's, sitting around by the fire, or you and your sisters are sitting around by the fire. There's no electric light. There's no internet. And so and it's at a magical time of the year for Christians, of course, because it's in that Christmas season. And you go, that you are actually doing a ritual when that happens. So it's not something you can port into the back of a mind, body, spirit store because you don't have all the other components.
Oh, taking that even further, you have these Russian rituals for the winter, these New Year's divinations where, you're supposed to go to the bathhouse, which is, not connected to your home. It's, you have to go outside and walk to this little house at midnight that's, and do all kinds of things to see whether, the spirits of the bathhouse are favoring you or not. I mean, they're beautiful. They're spooky in the best possible way, and a little exciting, but also a little frightening. And there's something really lovely with those. But they had no lights, no electric lights. It's all candlelight, and there's wind, and it's cold, and it's a whole. It's a different world.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. It's in a book I've got coming out in April, kind of going through one of the sort of, let me put it this way. I think spiritualism is an unintended side effect of electrified lighting in cities. The point, my Skype just ended up with me repeating the word Bible, 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 Bible over and over again as my audio crapped out, which is hilarious in its own way. But anyway, we'll pick the conversation right back up.
Well, I find that's really, I mean, what you were describing is a very interesting premise.
Yeah. So do you know what? Because I just kept talking. I just thought you were sitting there quietly.
No,
So,
speak quiet.
so I'm like, I'm really describing this well. I have nailed this description, and you've missed it. What a pity. But I mean, the history of magic runs alongside the history of technology, and that is, and I don't just mean, I definitely don't mean smartphones. I mean fire and agriculture. And the biggest jump in how our relationship to the night changed happened with the electrification of cities, because it fundamentally changed a ritual space that we would experience once every 24 hours.
Yes, absolutely.
Unless you lived like at the North Pole, in which case you have several months off. But everyone else gets it once every 24 hours.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because, I mean, I brought up the thing with the Russians with no electric light without realizing that you were going to go. That was just very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So let me wind it back to tarot.
Oh, are we being taped now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually,
Hi.
that was quite good banter. So I'm gonna keep that one
Okay.
in. Let's wind it back to tarot. What, Judica, is like? What's your read on the origin of tarot?
I don't want to enter that
I
controversy.
save the tough ones for the end.
Um, I, I mean, the short answer is I don't know. I am not that, that is not my expertise. There are people who are readers of tarot, there are people who are lovers of tarot, and there are people who are historians of tarot, and there are people who combine those things to varying degrees. And I am aware of the different, one of the things my first two books were somewhat personal, especially my first book, which my first book is about to begin its third incarnation. It will have a new edition in June. I think it's now going to be called the Big Book of Practical Spells, spell casting. And I didn't think I would ever write anything again. It was just an opportunity that arose for me. And so I put a lot of myself in that book. But once I began writing things that were 5,000 spells, clearly people ask me, have you cast all of them?
Yeah.
Oh my God, goddess forbid. Why should I, no one should have, need of all those problems. But you have to learn how to write, and I have published 4 encyclopedias now, and you have to be able to write about other people's traditions respectfully and neutrally. So I know all the different arguments. I will say, I dislike, personally, the desire among some to demystify cards. They, I think that to take away the magic, to take away, I don't have a problem not knowing where those cards came from. I don't think anybody actually does. I mean, I think we can trace the history, and we can say we found this deck here and that deck there, and yes, it was it was a game in Italy, and clearly cards, the concept of cards come from China and India. I don't know that it matters on a day-to-day basis. I love the magic of them. Were they, are they the vestiges of the mysterious Book of Thoth? Are they actually? Is there ancient Egyptian wisdom in them? Did the gypsies, a lot of my personal traditions. In a lot of ways, we were talking before about, my road to witchcraft. My road to witchcraft is definitely of the Central European, Balkan, Eastern European mode, as opposed to the Western and Northern European. And the Romani influence is very strong there, and very real, and very vital, and very present. It's not, there's this sort of romanticized or disparaged images of gypsies that show up in other places. But, that's the heartland. And so, I would not remove that. It's just a card game, it's just this. And later people have, and there is a truth to it, because everything can be used for divination. If you look at 5,000 spells, there are divination spells using household items like sieves. There is nothing. You look around you wherever you are, there is nothing that in a pinch you could not use for divination if you have to. And so, yes, of course, cards lend themselves to it by nature. And, it's not to say that the first card, maybe the first cards were intended for games rather than for divination. But I don't know that I don't know that they have to be separated. When
They
I play,
aren't. They definitely
yeah,
aren't.
you know,
There's
you
no
know,
way. Yeah, like if you picture medieval Europe or
yeah,
early Renaissance Italy, the reason there were taboos, particularly for women, on
yes,
playing games was that you're kind of daring God
uh-huh,
to change the future. So when people, if they trace it back to an Italian game and say it's just a game, they've explained nothing
I agree.
because you've completely failed to see what a game is. And funnily enough, the archaeology obviously isn't there to trace it back to Egypt, but Egypt had, especially the New Kingdom, a game called Senet, which was a board
Mhm.
game about
Right,
crossing to the other world and back. And if you were
right.
good at it, that meant you're more likely on your eventual journey across to the
Well, it was
Western
training.
lands when you don't. It is
It was
training,
training.
and that's
I mean,
why. I mean, you can use a sieve
yeah.
for divination, but I think why tarot cards have been so persistent is they work better because there is something inexplicable
Yeah.
about its gamified components because you are kind of daring God. Like that's the idea. It is this probabilistic future, not just what is going to happen, but the outcome of a game should be in that kind of sort of Near Eastern Hebrew idea. The outcome of a
Right.
game belongs to God, and so if you're
Right.
playing that game, you're daring the Creator to throw things your way. So it's always a bit dodgy in a delicious way to be
Oh
the
yeah.
gamified part, you know.
You know, I am not a good card player. I'm talking about in terms of games. But you know, I was married to someone who loved playing cards, and I have family members, you know, who like playing cards, and I have certainly sat in Las Vegas or Atlantic City at a table and watched other people play cards, and in my mind, I'm always doing the divination as they're playing
Yeah,
because I read playing cards.
yeah,
And so, you know, I keep my mouth shut, but you know, there are different things going on simultaneously. Simultaneously, you know, you're dealt a hand to play a game with, but simultaneously, you know, if I was reading those cards, I'm watching what cards you're getting.
yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the card thing came first. Interesting. I just to kind of touch on what you said earlier about cards being more expensive now. I mean, they're
Yeah.
bigger and deeper market. But
Yeah.
I first clapped eyes. I wasn't 6. I was a bit older. I must have been 11. I
Mm.
first clapped eyes on a set of tarot cards in a news agency that in Newcastle, Australia, where I grew up. And I said, "Mum, can I have them?" And she's like, "No." No, I cannot. So I had an opposite situation, but they were $4.99 Australian, and
Yeah.
in the 80s, and it was a mass produced Rider Waite. I mean, the cards wouldn't have been very good quality. You get what you get for $5, but in some ways it's good that you can actually spend $90 on some sort of amazing card set. I mean, I'm a hypocrite. I have right in front of me
I know.
a Sibylla set that I got in Venice that was hand printed. Well, not Venice, Florence, because Florence has this long tradition of
Yeah.
publishing and cards, and the Sibylla thing was there. And these cost me. There's only, I think, 15 of them in the world, but they cost me €70. I've used them maybe 5 times. I look at them. I have other Sibylla decks because I can't be splashing out on €70 decks all the time. Jump back in with the final question about practice now.
I don't know that I practice any different, other than by the nature of writing, I've become more solitary than I was. I've had periods. Well, I don't know. You know, I lived in I used to live in Hoboken, which is right outside. You know, for people who know, that's across the river from New York City, where Frank Sinatra's hometown. And you know, I was very, you know, I had a coven then, and it was very sort of sociable. Then I moved to Los Angeles, and I didn't know anyone, and I became very solitary. And I think the writing has really added to that. So, you know, I have my own time frame and my own, you know, I've become this very sort of independent person. I sort of do things on my own. I don't, but it's all an evolution. I don't think anything has changed as much as I have evolved. How do I practice now?
Well, I mean, when did you...
Shamanically,
Yeah, nice.
that shamanic witchcraft. I mean, to me, it's always it's always, I'm very aware. I would call myself, if I don't like labels, but if I had to call myself something, I'm an animist. I'm very aware. Everything is animated. Everything has a spirit. Everything is an interactive relationship, whether, with the invisible beings that, always surround us, or the invisible beings that you have to summon, or the spirits of just, the items that surround you. So that is to me the sort of that interactive. So even if I'm not with other human beings, there's always that interaction. If that makes any sense.
No, I know precisely what you mean. I'm pro animist, so I think all the good ones end up there in the end. However long the journey. In my case, quite long to get there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Me too. Me too. I mean, it's all been. I mean, I've never not done this. When the first draft of the manuscript for 5,000 Spells, I began writing it, and I realized I had bitten off more than I anticipated. They asked to see a manuscript, and I sent it all in, and it was, in bits. It wasn't cohesive. But what surprised me was my editor said, "Where are the spells?" And it was full of spells, but it wasn't, at that time, it wasn't sort of written as, the formatting was somewhat different. And I realized that, my whole day is a spell. It's never not magical, it's never not witchcraft. Sometimes it's more, there's more effort sometimes than other times. But once you kind of, I think that it's an evolutionary thing. Once you reach a level of consciousness or comprehension, you can't not see what you know to be there, and you can't not hear or what you know to be there. So once you're aware of all this stuff, you're always walking in that landscape. And to some extent, maybe it was a little bit easier for me because my mother was kind of walking, and my mother was not a practitioner, although she was, maybe a mystic, but she was always walking in that landscape, that landscape that is very fluid, where you're walking with the ancestors, you're walking, with the past and the future and the present all together. And, maybe as water signs, it's an easier, it might be easier for some people to do than others, or just maybe not easier, but more natural. Some of us fall into it. I used to fall into, apparently as a child, I fell into fish ponds very easily, ornamental ponds. They were, always pulling me out of them. And I didn't do it deliberately, but there you have it. So I think I've fallen into things sometimes, and it's very hard to say, oh, this is my tradition and this is exactly how I do it. There are sacred beings that I work with more than others, and I'm very conscious of the sun and the moon. I love the sun and I love the moon, and I've learned a lot of things from different traditions and from different people, and I'm comfortable in the world. So some people are very local, and some people are very international. And neither, there's no wrong or right finding what's right for you. I come from people who travel, and, so I'm comfortable expanding what I know and absorbing. The English language is a very, it absorbs other words from other languages, and I think it gives you kind of a mindset. I think the language that you speak sort of structures the way you think.
Absolutely.
And so there I am.
Yeah, funnily enough, I absolutely hear everything. I think that's fantastic. It also, it must appear frustrating when, I don't know how you respond to it, but if you get new people asking, so what do I do then? And you go, just whatever, like you'll get there. Like, don't be a dick about it. Do the things that resonate with you. And it's an answer that, I mean, if I'd been told that, I would have gone, what are you doing to me? What are you doing?
No, I get tons of email, and I apologize because I can't, I just, I'm successful enough to get a lot of email, but not, I don't have minions. So, it's me or no one, and sometimes it's no one. So, I apologize if I haven't answered, and, but I don't mind answering. People read my books and and they write to me. I don't know who else to ask this, and so I'm honored that they ask. And I wish I had clones and I could do more and more efficiently. But no, it doesn't bother me when people ask that. I understand
Yeah,
that.
I didn't mean it in a bother sense. I mean it that I don't end up giving good answers because I'm like, I, how I got to, even if here is a place, how I got here is not a process that turns into a 10-step plan. I just, moved around the world, did a whole bunch of things wrong, tried some things, made some mistakes, and you need to go and do a similar version of that. And it sounds like a brush off, but if I don't say that, I'm lying. If I tell them like, oh, you should do this, I'm like, I don't know, I didn't do that. You can't, that was what's interesting to me when there are practitioners who I resonate with, like yourself, that has landed in this kind of animist world, and operates in it, and it doesn't matter who you ask and how they got there. They're like either, well, to be honest, I think I've always been here, and the process was realizing it. Tends to be the most common answer, and you go, so that doesn't unpack very easily into a set of instructions. So I'd sort of tell people, go and buy Judika's 5,000 spells, cast them at random, see what happens.
I have people who tell me they do bibliomancy with my books. Especially like Encyclopedia of Spirits or, the Mystic Saints and Sages. And that makes me very happy.
That's good. That's you're in the grimoire current there, or the bibliomantic current in general. That's very cool.
Yeah. No, I mean, I actually think I give good answers, but I think that people might be frustrated with those, those answers, because I tell them, people want me to tell them, read this book, and then you will know what you're doing, or apprentice with this person, and it's just, we all have our own paths, and you have to read everything you can get your hands on, and learn from everyone, even if you disagree with them. Sometimes you listen to people and you disagree with them, and it helps you refine what is your path just by hearing, that kind of dialectic. Just hearing something that you don't agree with is sometimes very helpful. So, and I know that it's that pace, the rhythm. We live in a hurried world, and people want to, hurry up and get to be a master. And, it's a journey of a lifetime. And the cliche, that the journey is it's the journey that is the valuable part, but it's true.
Well,
it is.
That's a delicious truth bomb for us to end the episode on, I think. Judika, where might people go to find out more about your amazing self?
I have a website that I should be updating. It's my name, JUDIKAILLES.com. My books can be found wherever fine books are sold, online and offline. And I'm on all kinds of social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of the above. And, you can tell when I'm not writing a lot, or when I'm, I'm stalling, because I post more.
I wouldn't know anything about that. Well, obviously all that information and links to your fantastic books will be in the show notes as well. So this has been an absolute pleasure. As I said, your book has been my luggage for a long time, and it's always on high rotation. Well, several of your books, but especially Spells. Spells it's I feel like written for me. So thank you so much. Yeah, there you go. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Quite a few gremlins on the line there, kids. Sorry about that, but you get what I pay for. Hopefully it didn't distract too much from a lovely and informative conversation. I'm personally quite struck by Judika's stories of the intercultural experimentation that was going on in New York when she was cutting her magical teeth. Not only does that seem very New York, or even just very American to me, it's also pretty much how every successful pivot point in magic happened in the first place. So I guess that today it's encouraging that a lot of that sort of squeamishness around intercultural experimentation is eroding. So, if you like what you heard from this episode, insofar as its content was concerned and not perhaps the audio quality, then please do subscribe in iTunes, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, or on YouTube. Have something to say, leave a comment at runesoup.com or on the Facebook page, or reach out on Twitter where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.